The Nuts and Bolts of Writing, Season 2, a podcast where we talk about literature, the ins and outs of writing, and how to actually start writing. Hi, everyone. Today we have a special guest, James Mitchell. James Mitchell was born in New York City, which nurtured his love of classical music from an early age. Professing little to no talents, however, he left the playing of music mostly to others until the writing of musical chairs. For the 67 years that elapsed between music lessons, Mr. Mitchell was an actor, a sales manager for a ski company, president of a national advertising agency, a cowboy and wilderness outfitter, an educator, and co-founder of an NGO aiding women in Afghanistan. Mr. Mitchell is working on 2 books and otherwise occupies his time going to concerts, playing music, tennis, cycling, and riding and driving horses. He lives in the country near Longmont, Colorado with his wife, some zebra finches, an old cat, and a few equines. He is immensely proud and fond of his 2 grown offspring and has 1 very young grandson. So, welcome to the show, James.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Today, we're going to be talking to James about his upcoming book, which will hit retail on September 19, 2023. His book is called Musical Chairs, a 76-year-old's quest to learn every instrument in the orchestra. So, what prompted you to write this book?
Well, I was retired, as you might guess, from a 76-year-old. I'm now 80, but the book took 3 years to write. And when you retire, you don't want to just sit in a chair like your grandparents did on the porch in a rocker, the newspaper in front of you with drool dripping out of the side of your mouth. You want to have something to occupy yourself and to engage yourself and keep living a vital life. And I spent most of my professional career as some sort of a writer, not writing books, but writing for literature and for articles in magazines. And I've always loved classical music, as you read in the bio. So it seemed like it was a natural to try to combine the 2 things, writing and love of music, and write about them. But it wasn't a thoughtful process. It just came to me all at once as my wife and I were on a road trip, and it just came fully blown that I would learn all the instruments in the orchestra. And my wife was a little bit skeptical at the time. And I said, I can do it. I'll just take lessons. And I said, it's simple. And she said, that's simple? I said, yeah, just take lessons. I said, Jim, she said, you're 76. And that wasn't quite throwing down the gauntlet as a challenge, but it didn't dissuade me from trying to learn all the instruments, which I did. And I must say that my wife of 40 some odd years was probably the most patient person in the world. You might imagine when you're not a musician, and I'm not a musician, at least I wasn't, and you pick up an instrument for the first time with lessons and try to make music, coax music out of these instruments, the early weeks are not very pleasant for the listener. And you have to admire my wife for being very patient. Only one time did she ask me to close the door to my studio, and that was when I picked up the violin. That was a little bit more than she could stand.
Yes, as someone who has learned the violin before, the violin is very difficult. If you don't, pick the right note on the string, it can create some very harsh sounding sounds.
Yeah. And that was one of the reasons why I didn't start with the violin. I did start with the strings, and it was 12 lessons, only 12 lessons for each instrument. And by that end of that time, I had to be able to play an excerpt from the classical repertoire so that people would recognize it, not like a professional, but well enough so it was pleasant to listen to. And I started with the strings because it's what I knew the least about. And I wanted to attack that when I was still fresh and enthusiastic about the project. Because when you started this, you don't know if it's going to go. You don't know if it's going to finish it. All the instruments, 12 lessons on each, is 3 months per instrument. take at least 3 years to do it. And I didn't know if I had the staying power to do that. So I started with the ones that were the hardest. And turned out it started with the bass, in part because I was advised that the bass, as big as it is, there's lots of room between your fingers when your fingers hit the strings on the fingerboard. And you can see a lot of what your hands are doing. So that would be harder to make mistakes. It's more forgiving when there's more room between the strings. The violin, as you say, you have played the violin, everything is very close together. So it's very fine muscle memory and fine motor skills. If you miss by just a little bit on the violin, you can hear it. On the bass, not so much. So it's a little bit easier to start with that. And so I did.
Did you try the viola out of curiosity?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask that question.
Really? Why?
Well, because going through the strings, I came to the bass, the cello, then the violin, and the next instrument in the progression was the viola. And I started looking into the viola, and the viola is a very unusual instrument in that it's not written in the treble clef like a violin or the wind instruments. It's not written in the bass clef like a bass violin. I mean, a double bass or the cello. It's written in what's called the alto clef, which is different altogether. And it looked to me like it was a different language that I wouldn't be able to understand, and it scared the bejeebers out of me. And so I wrote a chapter in the book about not playing the viola. I didn't play it. I chickened out.
Yeah, I don't think I would want to either. I've never actually heard of the alto, you know, the you know the octaves. You know, I only know of treble and bass. I never heard of alto, because before I learned violin, I did learn piano a little bit, and piano only has treble and bass. So where's alto? How would you read that? I would be very intimidated too.
I really was, and although the principle isn't that different, because if you have some music background, and most of us have a little bit, you know that in the treble clef, the place on the between the lines, for example, where a middle highest C is, not the highest C, but in the staff at C, is a different place on the bass clef. So you're really already interpreting different clefs when you play a C. If you see a C in the bass clef, it's different than it looks. It's a different place on the music than the treble clef. So it's the same as the alto, but somehow or other it just threw me. It was a third language, if you will, in the music approach to playing thing, and it's a beautiful instrument. And I did, in writing the chapter, listen to a fair amount of solo cello music, which you don't usually hear, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It's a mellow, soulful tone that is richer than a violin and brighter than a cello. It's that in-between layer of music that's actually gorgeous, but because it's this in-between, when you listen to an orchestra play, you really can't hear them. You can hear the oboes, you can hear the clarinets, you can hear the violins, you can hear the brass individually, each instrument. But try as hard as I could, listening to orchestral music, I cannot pick out the cello parts. They're the glue, they're the mortar, if you will, that holds other parts together, other instruments together. But you don't really hear them, and probably they'd be more noticeable in their absence than in their presence. So it's a very unsung instrument, but a very vital instrument to the texture of the orchestra.
Right. Number 2, in your bio, you said you always loved classical music. Growing up, how were you exposed to this genre of music, and what did you particularly like about it?
I think that when you're young, when you're growing up, and your parents have a certain kind of music in the house, you either love it as they do and are drawn to it and love when they turn on the music, or you hate it and turn to some other genre entirely. My parents, particularly my mother, loved classical music, and she was a good pianist. She wasn't concert level, but she could play Chopin waltzes and etudes and preludes, which are difficult to play. And she could play them on a rotten old piano, so she was a pretty good player. And we had lots of records. In those days, it was records. And it started out actually, when I was very young, with 78 RPM records. even before 33s, well before any kind of digital music. So I was exposed to it and always loved it. They were very good. My parents took me to concerts, took me to the opera, and it was just part of my life growing up. And I always loved to listen to it. As you read from the bio, I wasn't very talented, so I didn't play music, but I appreciated it very much, and always have. Always in my career when I was working, I'd always have classical music playing in the background. And it
I
was both
see.
stimulating. It made I think my brain cells collide in a nice way, and it was also kind of soothing and calming at the same time.
Who are your favorite composers?
Well, it may be, cliche, but you can't beat Beethoven. It's pretty hard to top Beethoven. I know some people will say that Mozart was the greatest composer of all time. His musical genius surpasses everybody. But I find, as most people do, that Beethoven is such an emotional composer. It's very hard not to feel something when you hear any Beethoven symphony at all. You can't, at least I can't really do something else. When that comes on, I need to listen to the music and not just, sandpaper or piece of wood or something like that.
All right. Third question. Which instruments do you enjoy the most and why?
It's a not easy question to answer because I played 11 instruments in this process of doing all the instruments, or almost all the instruments. To be honest, I didn't do the piccolo, I didn't do the tuba, didn't do the harp or the percussion, but I did all of the essential instruments in the orchestra. So the one that I'm playing at the time was the one I seemed to like the most. I was always sorry to see one instrument go by, lessons end, and I had to go on to the next instrument. And I would take a week between each instrument. So it was kind of sad because after 12 weeks, you're really just getting to the point where you can do something very well on that instrument. Then you're putting it aside. So you're not fulfilling what potential ultimately could be. But then a week goes by and you get over your sadness and you pick up your new instrument from the rental shop and you start to work with it and you say, my gosh, this one also has some incredibly beautiful qualities to it that are different, but that can get, if you allow it to get inside you, it can get inside and move you emotionally and intellectually too. It's something that they're difficult to master intellectually. So I think it's hard to say which one I liked the most or which one meant the most to me. It depended most on what I was playing at the time.
You mentioned you were an actor. Since acting is a form of art, did it influence how you saw music? Did it also influence your interest in writing?
I think the part of acting where that you have to bring forth your creative juices and whatever kind of creativity you have in your soul, not just to read the words on the page that some playwright put down, but to actually interpret them and to have people in the audience believe that you are that character, not James Mitchell. The creative part of it definitely helped in my writing career and also in making music, because even though I really haven't performed very much with these instruments, just a little bit with other people, when you're looking at the music and you're interpreting the music, you're doing the same thing an actor does. You're seeing the notes instead of the words. You put the same piece of music in front of three different players, let's say the oboe, it'll sound very different. Same way three different actors can look at a role in a play, and you got to watch the three different actors play the same scene. It'll be very different because the way they interpret it and the way you bring your own humanity and your own creative juices to the interpretation and the playing of the music. One thing that's very interesting I learned with all these instruments is that at first, when you pick up the instrument, you're playing the notes. Your teacher gives you some music to play and you're learning the notes. But after a certain period of time, if you want to make music, you have to tell yourself, okay, I know the notes. Now I need to play the music. I need to make the music. It's very, very different when you can make that transition from playing the notes to playing the music. And what that does to you as a player, maybe anybody listening to this who plays an instrument knows what I'm talking about. When you play the music and are not cognizant so much of what note follows each note, it's an emotional reaction. It's an emotional experience, which I don't know if anything besides music can give you that feeling. It's remarkable.
Hmm. I think that's very relatable, definitely. Because when I was learning music, they would always say after you can read all the notes and you practice hitting all the keys, whether it's on the piano or the violin, they're like, you have to watch out for the tempo, and you also have to look for the crescendo, and think about what the composer intended the listener to feel when he or she composed this parts, right? So you have to think about the bigger picture. And sometimes you even have to read a little bit of history. What was Beethoven thinking, or what was he experiencing when he was composing this piece, right? That could also really influence how you're supposed to interpret it. Maybe it's supposed to be a sad thing, something he's mourning, something he's trying to confront in his own life, reflected in his music.
Very, very true. And if you sometimes listen to a interview with a top flight classical musician, what they know about the music and just what you said about what stage of life the composer was at the moment he wrote this piece informs them as to how to play whatever they're playing. They know an awful lot. They're incredibly bright about the intellectual part of music making. I think you're right.
Mm-hmm. So it is exactly like, acting and writing, because, you can know the chops of acting, you can know the chops of how to write and how to make, effective sentences. But if there's no soul behind it, it falls flat, just like music.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And I think what's interesting about musical chairs, my book, is that it's pretty breezy. It's not a musicological scholarly piece. It's about the journey, about the adventure of what happens when you take on something that you don't know you can do. I had no idea if this would work out or not. So there's no predetermined outcomes. You just write about what happens, and that's sometimes pretty funny.
Very true. So, question number 5. Why did you have 5 careers before writing musical chairs? Sounds like a drifter to me.
It sounds like a drifter to me too. And looking back on it, I can't say that it was anything else but that. But living it, it wasn't. It was just. I think I've been very lucky in that um, I've been able to follow what I wanted to do in my career. In different parts of my life. When you're young, you want to do some things that change when you get to middle age and change again when you get older. And if you're not afraid to take on a challenge, even in a career, you just do it because you either have the opportunity or you want to. I mean, I had nothing to do with outfitting or being a cowboy, but I went on a pack trip with some people, and it was a lot of fun. But the trip was not well run. I said, "Well, I can do better than that." So I started a business. So if you want to do something and you apply yourself, and you have moderate talent, you probably can do it, as long as you don't have to be the best at something. I think that it's difficult if somebody thinks they always have to be the best at whatever they do. You miss a lot of opportunities, you miss a lot of experiences in life because you can't be the best all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But if you enjoy the process of trying to be the best or trying to be really good, there's a lot of value in the process, as well as whatever you actually end up achieving. And I was very young when I was an actor. I was very young when I was a sales manager for a ski company, and a little bit older when I worked for Samsonite, and a little bit older, but still in my 30s when I started my own advertising agency. But it's because I wanted to, and it seemed like it was interesting, and people responded to what I was doing. So you do have to have some encouragement along the way if you're going to be an accomplished drifter. Can we add that to that drifter description?
Yeah, definitely. So, question number 6. Not many people start on a 3-year project when they are 76, especially when they know next to nothing about it. Were you trying to prove something to yourself, to others?
No, it was an adventure. it was an adventure. It resonated with me. The idea, as we already established, I loved music. I knew how to write. Why not document this process of trying to learn all the instruments? You know, I've only once been in an orchestra where I was surrounded by other people playing this glorious music, and that was when I was involved in education, and the lower school where I was working, kindergarten through fifth graders, had a visit from the Colorado Symphony Orchestra. They had an outreach program, and the kids sat in a group, and the orchestra surrounded them with the instruments, and I was one of the kids in that group, if you will. Excuse me. And that's the only time that I was surrounded by the sounds of an orchestra, and it was absolutely thrilling. People who have played in an orchestra know what I'm talking about. There's a thrill to being surrounded. No sound system that you have in your house or in the movie theater can, or even in the symphony hall, can come close to being in the orchestra itself. So that's what I was sort of thinking of when I said, I'd like to play all the instruments and be my own orchestra, so to speak, and just learn one after another. And different excerpts, wasn't the same excerpt, different excerpts from with each instrument, but fairly iconic excerpts for the particular instrument that it's known for.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the motivation for it, I think.
Yeah, sometimes I think, just doing it because you like it is definitely the best motivation, more so than proving a point, which I think can actually discourage oneself because if you don't have an internal motivation, just having an external one of trying to prove something can be a deterrent, especially when you don't feel motivated by that anymore.
Yeah, and I think if you don't have something to prove, you can be much freer in what you're doing, the way you approach it, because you're not saying, oh my gosh, if I don't get to such and such level, what's going to happen to me? I'm going to lose my job, or no one's going to like me,
Yeah.
or whatever it might be. But if you have undifferentiated expectations, you can just freely approach something. Okay, here's an experiment. I'm going to try to learn all these instruments. Here's the first one. Here's the double bass. Let's go. Let's see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And without any predetermined idea, you just write about what happens. And I wasn't great at all of them. There's some that gave me a lot of trouble, and very different levels of accomplishment of each one.
Question number 7. How many times did you think of bagging the whole thing during these 3+ years?
I never did. Never did. Each instrument was rewarding enough, and I had some wonderful teachers who were rewarding enough, had the wonderful stick and carrot approach, carrot and stick approach, encouragement and firmness to do better, that I never wavered at all. And and if I missed a day of practicing, which was rare, for those 3 years, I probably missed maybe a dozen days of practicing. It was a lot of discipline to do it, but it was also enjoyable because I think sometimes when you take something new, there's a rapid level of accomplishment at first. You can get better at something fairly quickly, up to a certain level. Then it levels off and takes a long time for it to get to the next level. So I think the 12 weeks may have been the magic number for me. 12 lessons, excuse me, 3 months of always being motivated, always seeing, okay, I know what I'm trying to do this week. Let's really go after it and see what happens. So it never got to the point where it was, oh, drudgery. I've got to practice, and I've been playing the same tune for 6 weeks. I don't want to do it anymore. It never got to that point. It was always 12 weeks, on to the next one.
Mm-hmm. That definitely helps. Yeah. Because, the more it drags out, I think the more, repetitive it can get in certain aspects. And I think that's really discouraging for a lot of people.
Yeah. There's one thing in the demonstration of that very point. It was on the violin, and I made some rapid progress and was getting toward the last week of lesson, at which I had to play Bach's air on the G string. And something happened. and it wasn't coming out right. It was getting worse and worse and worse. My teacher said, okay, what you need to do is practice this piece 10 times a day between now and the next lesson. So I did that for a couple of days and then met with another friend, teacher of mine, a cello teacher, and told her what was going on. She said, don't do that. Stop. Don't play anything. Put it away. Don't play anything for 2 days. Play it once or twice the day before your lesson. Don't do anything else. What? I'm supposed to play this 10 times a day. And the cello teacher said, don't do it. You know that music. Just let it rest. You're having a tough time. You've reached the point where it's just, you're locked in or you're locked out, perhaps a better way to put it, of really playing it. And I followed her advice. And when I went to play it at my last lesson, it came out just fine. It was the best I ever played it. So that repetitiveness had gotten to the point where it was not beneficial at all, becoming too mechanical, too analytical. And by going away from it and then letting the music take over when I played it, it worked out just fine.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, especially when you don't overthink it. I think a lot of the times why it comes out analytical is because you're overthinking and you're thinking about, oh no, I made this tiny error when, I played B flat, I accidentally hit the wrong notes. And then you're like, oh no. And then when you think more about your errors, you're going to naturally make more errors. So, that just leads to the whole piece being ruined.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. You get uptight.
Right.
And you have to
So
have anything creative, you need to be fairly loose and free.
you do. Yeah. You have to be pretty relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
Question number 8. You could have tackled something else, like taking 12 lessons in 11 languages and then be able to order a meal in each language at an ethnic restaurant. Why music?
Well, probably because maybe subconsciously, because I loved classical music and I could write, I must have understood that there was a fairly decent chance of succeeding at playing musical instruments. Whereas if I had tried it with languages, I'm not sure what the outcome might have been. Which maybe that's the next book. I'm not sure, but that's it's an interesting approach. I think we could ask ourselves that question, and maybe each of us comes up with something that we'd really like to do based on our experiences up to the point, whatever we are in our life, and say, okay, let me try this experiment. Let me see what happens. You have to write a book about it, but I think it's a nice way to keep fresh, especially if it's something not to do with your career. We are often so consumed by our careers that that's what we focus so much of our time on. And probably like cross-training in athletics, if you do the same sport all the time, you're not going to be as good at it. You cross-train a little bit, play soccer in season, then play tennis out of season, rather than playing soccer 12 months a year. Same thing with our career. I think that we are probably better in our jobs if we spend a good amount of time doing something that's not to do with our jobs and just makes us a better able to think and process and problem solve in some other areas.
Very good points. Yeah. Because when you do something at your work and then you just keep on doing it, you kind of get disenchanted by it. For me personally, I write for my living as well. It's my work as a copywriter. And I noticed that after becoming a copywriter, I started feeling that I didn't want to write in my free time. I didn't want to do creative writing anymore because I already had to pump out, 3,000, 4,000 words a day at work. So I was like, why do I need to write more? Even though it is for my own, creativity, I don't want to do it. And even now I'm kind of struggling with that a bit. And I feel guilty for not writing as much, for my personal stuff. But sometimes you just have to let go because you have to balance your life. Writing at work does drain my energy and I have to accept that. And, that's why I'm doing other creative stuff, such as game development, arts, and just, gaming in general, just like not doing anything to do with writing in my free time. And so that helps me also to relax during work because I don't have to think about being overwhelmed by words.
I'll bet it also opens up your own creative writing too.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So I just have to take more breaks.
Yeah, yeah.
So, question number 9. The subject is serious, but the book has a lot of humor in it, much of it self-deprecating. Why did you do that?
It wasn't intentional, but it's what happened. I mean, when I started learning these instruments, a lot of very funny things happen. And so I can't just write about the seriousness of the music and the history of the cello and when it was developed and how it came to be the way it is now, which is also in the book. There's a fair amount of historical information about instrument development and composers' lives, and those are not particularly funny. But my experiences were if it hadn't been funny, it wouldn't have been a funny book. But it was funny. I mean, the trombone. I was playing the trombone in a lesson one day. There's an exercise where you go back and forth at different levels from the close to your mouth, furthest away from your mouth, and back and forth. And at one point, I lost control of the slide, and it left the trombone. It went shooting across the room like William Tell's arrow, barely missing my teacher, smashed against the wall. You can't write about that seriously because it happened. It was very funny. And he and I just broke up and started laughing because that's it's like a slapstick Buster Keaton movie or something like that, where the trombone disappears across the room. And other things happen. I guess also I've become a not very serious person. I used to be much more serious when I was younger, but I'm not so serious anymore.
Because life is actually really funny when you think about it.
Well, yeah, and I think in fairness to our life cycles, when you're retired, things become less critically important.
That's
you're not
true.
worried about your job. You're not worried about producing whatever you're supposed to produce, and so you can let your humor come up to the surface more. It makes life a lot of fun.
Definitely. So, question number 10. Playing a classical music excerpt in just 12 lessons is quite a challenge, made more so by the week after week, month after month nature of the book. How much pressure did you feel to do well?
Well, I don't think I felt pressure. I felt desire, and I'd like to make a distinction between those two. Pressure is external. I think desire is internal. And I never felt pressure, but I felt a very strong desire to make the music as good as I possibly could in those 12 weeks. And it's a strong motivation, your own desire, your own wish to do well. And I think there's a problem could arise. There's a famous psychologist named Karen Horney who talked about the tyranny of the shoulds. I should be able to do this. I should be able to play this better. Darn it, I should be able to do it. And that can put you into a downward spiral pretty quickly. And if you let yourself be influenced by the shoulds. But it also has a positive side that you say, I should be able to do this better. It may mean, well, I need to practice some more. And to look at this a little bit differently. Approach this piece with a little bit different perspective. Maybe that will enable me to do it better. I should look at this differently. So it's not always bad, but it can be. But I never felt that pressure. I never felt that pressure at all because the desire was there to do well. And in reality, unlike a career, if I didn't succeed at a particular instrument, it wasn't the end of the world. The book is about what happens in this journey. So if I didn't succeed, I'd write about that. I failed. I don't think I did very well on the bassoon. The chapter on the bassoon points that out. Is this what failure feels like? That I didn't achieve exactly what I wanted to achieve. So this isn't all Pollyanna book. There were some real challenges and some degree of failure along the way. But 12 weeks, it's over. You move on to the next one. So you don't have a long life to dwell on your failure and have it really affect your next project.
Yes, exactly. So are you still playing music and after all those music lessons?
I am. When I was very young in middle school, I played the clarinet. And it's kind of like, a bicycle. You ride a bicycle for 20 years, you can get on the bicycle and ride it pretty well the first time you put yourself back in the saddle. And I found the same thing with the clarinet. And in the book, in fact, I didn't take lessons when I came to the clarinet. I taught myself, and it took less than 12 weeks. because it came back so fast. I was already at a higher level starting the clarinet than I was at the end of the 12 weeks with any of the other instruments. So when the book was done, and I said, well, my gosh, I've been playing music every day of my life for 3 years. There was a real void at the end of the book, at the end of the lessons. So I decided to pick up the clarinet again and take lessons and continue to play it. And I still am. And I'm enjoying it very much.
That's wonderful. What pieces do you usually play with the clarinet?
Well, there's, of course, the Adagio for the Mozart Clarinet Quartet, which is beautiful and not as fast as the other movements. So I've been working on that, and a Sonatina by Bach I'm working on with my teacher. And there's a quartet that we get together, clarinet quartet, through my teacher that we have been trying to get together regularly. It's a little difficult. But generally it's Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, the greats. They've all written, they either have written music for the clarinet or their music has been transcribed for the clarinet. So there's a wealth of musical literature to play.
Mm-hmm. I see. Well, thank you so much for coming onto this podcast. And, we are all very excited for your book to hit the shelves in September 2023. So, I think in the future, when your book is released, and you're on your book tour, you can feel free to come back onto the podcast to talk about that experience, because that is very exciting. And we haven't really talked to an author who has had a book, released retail and, experience that. And it would be great to share your experiences with us if you're interested.
Well, I'd love the wonderful invitation. I'll take you up on that. That'd be a great pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.